Hello and welcome to CHISEL, short takes JavaScript inside out. In this episode, we dig deeper into the fundamental but elusive aspects of functions, different ways, probably some of the ways we'll look at creating them, and the keyword this. So, without much ado, let's begin. So, functions, the generic definition, are block of code which does some specific task. That's pretty generic. So, and what we need to understand is functions are special types of objects in JavaScript, unlike the other languages. So when you say it's a special type of object, it typically allows us to, assign them to variables, create them on the fly, and also to pass them around. And you would have heard about callback functions where you pass a function as an argument to another function. So that's because the functions are objects. They are special types of objects within JavaScript. Okay. And when I say objects, it typically means that it allows you to attach properties and methods. Is it not? So a property is just simply a name value pair. The value could either be primitives or the value could be a function. And in case if it is function, it is called as method formally. Take a look at this infographic. So again, JavaScript is inside JavaScript, you say a chase function is a special type of object. So this can attach to primitives. This can attach to an object, and the function can also attach to another function. And in this case, it's just methods, right? So you can say method of the object. And in addition to this, it also has two hidden properties. One of them is name, a function and function name. So it can have a name and it is optional because functions can also be anonymous functions. And the other property is the actual code you write. And the code that you write inside the function body is invocable, which means that you use the function name and the braces, the rounded braces. So that's what we call invocation of function. So all these are part and parcel of a function. And remember, function in JavaScript is a special object. And this should be familiar because we had seen this multiple times in the previous episodes. So an execution context, the constituents of execution context, we need to see this, the variable this. We will uh, take a good look at this variable in context of functions. Cool. Let's move on. So in order to demonstrate what we just discussed, it is a very simple program. So function declaration. And you could see the function name dot company, function name dot industry. These are properties. So again, functions are objects, so it can have properties. Cool. And you could see this, the startup is the name of the function. So startup dot display details. So functions are objects, so it can have methods. So the display details is the method which gets attached to the function. And here you could see this, you should be familiar with this. This is the way to, it's an object literal. This is the way to, one of the ways to create an object within JavaScript. And you're attaching this object to the function again. So functions are objects, so it can contain another object. Okay, and you use it's sort of a static method. So you use the function name dot the static method to invoke this function. And this is what you get. This is the output that you get. Company, upquotient.com, and industry, education, and location, Vadakara. This is what we have assigned. This is a property of assigned the values to the property names, right? Company, industry. The same gets printed here. So nothing special about this. Remember, functions are special objects. So let's move on. So here we uh, see two different ways of creating a function. So one is the function declaration, and second way is the function expression. So some formal definitions of function declaration. So the function declaration, also known as the function statement, declares a function with a function keyword and requires a name. That's okay. So it's a usual way of for declaring a function name. And the function expression is similar to a function, but you know it doesn't require a name. So typically an anonymous function. So the way the syntax is also specified here, you could say function and function name. It can take arguments, and this is the function body. And this is a very simple example. Function greet is the name of the function. It takes name as one of its parameter, and it returns namaste and the name. And you console log the returned value, console log this, right? So console.log greet and Kali, nothing special as such, because this is how you invoke a function. So you have the function name and the rounded braces, and if it takes an argument, you place the argument inside the braces. Pretty cool, straightforward. Let's look at this. So the syntax is variable name. So functions could be assigned to variable, and variable name equals the function. So this doesn't have a name, right? Doesn't have a name. You don't need a name here. So this becomes your anonymous function. This is your anonymous function. It's not named. And you have the same example, just how it is returned is different, and it does the same task, right? So you invoke the function with the help of this variable, the name of the variable, pass the, you can say, the argument, and it returns namaste and Kali. Okay, straightforward. And hoisting, it's a pretty interesting area. So we had seen hoisting in previous episodes as well. So hoisting, you could say, it's a feature which typically allows to refer to functions or variables even before it is declared. Okay, so um, when you use function declarations or function statements, they get hoisted. So you could see this example. You have console.log greet and you pass Kali. So greet is you're referencing the function even before it is declared, because the function is declared beneath the reference. So you're referring greet function, and the greet function isn't declared before you reference greet. Greet is declared after you reference greet. So that's, and will it create a problem? Will it create an exception? Will it throw an exception? That's, we will see that. And here again, the same thing you're trying. So you are referencing greet, and the way you define your function, it's not the function declaration, but this is a function expression, right? So this is a function expression, and you're assigning the function expression to a variable greet, and you try to reference the function greet even before it is initialized. Okay, so will it create a problem? Will it throw an exception? So that's what we'll be seeing. Okay, and this is an infographic. Let's run through this quickly. It's the same program. So this one points to the function declaration, and you could see that I've added a debugger here, which means the execution stops if you have opened up your developer tools. Your execution stops here. So this is similar to the breakpoint that we create inside the dev console. So I will we will run through this also later on, as we have several examples. So what we are doing here is, we are trying to invoke this function, and the we know that as and when you invoke a function, you have an execution context created, and the execution context has two phases. The first phase is creation and hoisting phase, and the second phase is the code execution phase. So we are in the second phase, okay, the code execution phase. The first phase is already complete. So the code execution phase, when you use debugger, so this is a way to put a breakpoint programmatically. Okay, so debugger, it stops the execution here. It's not stopping, but it pauses, temporarily stops the execution, or it pauses the execution. And we're trying to examine the variable greet, right? So the greet is a function, right? So we're trying to see whether greet points to the function in its entirety or not. And you could see this greet is pointing to the function in its entirety. Okay, so we can conclude that when you use a function declaration, okay, and you are able to reference the function even before it is declared. This is why, because the function declarations are always hoisted. Okay, so when you say greet of Kali, you have absolutely no problem, because at the time of code execution, the function is already available to you and in its entirety. Okay, so when you look at this, okay, so we'll run through the code and then come back to the next infographic, next part of this infographic. Let me spot this, the hoisting. This is the code. I will uncomment the code, save, and move on to, okay, to this window and developer tools. I can explicitly have the breakpoint. Okay, so I'll explicitly put this breakpoint. This is one way, and another way is you can have your debugger written here. Okay, debugger, debugger written, and refresh this. You see it automatically stops here. The execution temporarily stops here or pauses here, and you can examine the, the variables, etc. So let me add the variable, the name greet. Okay, I want to see what it actually points to. See this. So the first phase of the execution context, so execution context, the greet. Okay, the first phase of the execution context is done. Okay, and it populated greet with the function in its entirety. Okay, and let's move on. I'll move on to the next line, and greet of Kali. Okay, and let's move on. Cool. So you could see this, the variable greet, right? The name or the variable greet points to the function in its entirety. So let's look at the other code. Okay, so I'll comment this out. Cool. Let's open this up. You could see this, the function is an expression here. Okay, I'll run this function. Probably I've not put the debugger here. I will do that inside the dev tools so that you know two different ways of pausing the code execution. Let's move on. I refresh this. Cool. Before this, yeah, I pause this execution here. So that's the execution context, right? Your execution context, during the execution context, you could see this. The the code is paused here, and I want to see what greet points to. The greet is pointing to undefined. So what typically happens is it doesn't really, understand what greet is pointing to, and you say that greet of Kali, it doesn't know, right? So that's a point where it throws an exception. You could see this. It say greet is not a function. Okay, it doesn't understand. So so it means that the conclusion, if you have an function expression, you it doesn't get hoisted. So you would not be able to refer to the specific function, the function expression, before it is initialized. Okay, that's a conclusion here. That's A key thing to understand, and one of the key things that discerns the function declaration versus the function expression. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so now we have gained some sound footing as far as functions are concerned, and function declarations versus function expression. So let's move into the elusive part, that is the treatment of this keyword. Okay, so this is a special keyword, or you could say object, you know, a variable, you could say a variable. And no, typically it gets spawned uh, when uh, when your code starts its execution, or when you invoke a function. So in either ways, you'll have the variable this pointing to specific object. It could be a window object, which is a global object, or other objects. So there are a few situations that we will be examining and see how this behaves. Okay, so before that, let's look at the formal definition of this. This is a keyword in JavaScript that is a property of an execution context. We have seen this, right? So execution context, one of the properties of the execution context. So these are execution context constituents, and this is one of the properties. Okay, that's what this definition says. So nothing new, right? And yeah. And in JavaScript, this keyword refers to an object. So which object depends on the context. Okay, and it depends on how the maybe a function is invoked. It could be a function, or it could be, yeah, it could be a function, and you're calling a function on all on its own, or you're calling a function through an object, or you're invoking a function through the new keyword. Okay, so we see all these different situations, scenarios, and understand what exactly this points to. Okay, it's a very important concept. Okay, and so let's look at the first example. So this when a function is invoked in a non-object context. So let me run through this code. It's a pretty simple code. The function person creator, and it takes my name as one of its parameters. All we have is just two statements inside this function. One is I'm trying to print this. So this is again, spawned automatically for you. And this I wanted to, with the help of this statement, I wanted to write what this is pointing to, what object this is pointing to. Okay, and then this particular statement, right, this should be familiar, this dot my name. So this is pointing to a specific object, and all I'm trying to do is to dynamically create a property called as my name. So this is pointing to window, which is a global object, and the global object is referred to as window if your JavaScript engine is running inside the browser, as in this case. Okay, so this dot my name is helps you to create a dynamic property. So my name becomes a property inside the object which this is pointing to. If this is pointing to window, so you have the my name property created inside the window object. Okay, so that's all this code, the function body, and we are invoking this function and passing Kali as one of its arguments. Pretty simple. And we have another console.log, and this time I am trying to ascertain if this is indeed pointing to window, because window.myname, right? So my name is a dynamic property, a property which is created dynamically. So if this is pointing to the window object, I should see my name created dynamically as a property inside the window object. Okay, and it should print the value of my name, which is Kali. Okay, so let's look at the code, and this is the infographics. Okay, this is the infographics, and we'll run through the infographics once we run through the code. Okay, so this is the code. Let me uncomment this, save, and run through this code. So I'll have my, the breakpoint. Okay, at here. Cool. So at this point, right? So console.log. So this line of code, person creator, right? This line of code, person creator, invokes this function, person creator, and I'm trying to console log this. Okay, so this gets automatically spawned. Okay, and you could see the value of this. This is pointing to the global object, which is window. And let me run through this. So you get this console logged here at the bottom. Next line, you could see this. This points to the window here. Okay, and let me run through the other piece of code. This dot my name, and again I run through this, and you come here, right? And now when I say window dot my name, it should print Kali here. So this ascertains that this is indeed pointing to window, and you are able to successfully create a property, a dynamic property, my name, and push whatever is passed as the parameter, which is Kali, as its value, and it gets printed here. Okay, so let me run through this code. You could see this Kali gets printed here. Pretty cool. Let's move on. So that's exactly what is being explained using this infographics. The first one is person creator. Okay, you call this. And the second is console log this. So this is pointing to the window. And here you're assigning the dynamic, creating a dynamic property my name and assigning whatever is passed to my name as property, as in parameter, and Kali is passed. So you are pushing Kali into my name dynamic property of this, which is pointing to window object. And fourth, you're printing the value of my name property inside the window object, and which prints Kali. Pretty straightforward. Let's move on. So this is the second scenario. This when a function is invoked via an object. So when you give an object flavor, when you invoke the function, right? So what happens to the value of this? Or in simple terms, which object this is pointing to in this context? A very simple function named alert. It has a couple of console logs. The first is this, and second is this dot age, years old. That's what you're trying to print. And you also have spawned or created an object. This is an object little notation, right? So to create an object, simple way to create an object. And you have two properties. The first property is named age, assigned a value of 45, and the second property is named alert, and here you are assigning a function, right? So this, the alert property points to a function. So which function? This function that you have declared here. Okay, so this essentially becomes a method of this object. And what happens when you try to invoke the function alert through an object? So you have a dot notation through an object. What does it print? Okay, that's what we will be looking at next. Comment this out. Let's move on. Okay, here we go. Here we go. And let me save this. I'm calling this now. I'm invoking the script. Control, cool. Remove all this. Cool, I have the breakpoint here. So it typically means you call this function already, right? So me object dot alert, and you have this console dot log of this, and you could see this is now pointing to the object, right? So this is now pointing to the object. You could see, and which object it is pointing to? It is pointing to, you could see this age is 45 and alert. So it is pointing to the same object, right? So this now represents the object. So me object dot alert invokes this function, and this gets automatically bound to the me object. Okay, so this now inside alert function is bound to the me object. Okay, and now me object dot age, it means that me object dot age is just going to print 45 years old. You could see 45 years old. Okay, this is the me object. Straightforward, pretty cool. Okay, so let me comment this out. Move on. And you could see this formal way of explanation. So put simply, when you call a function using dot notation, this is implicitly bound to the object the function is being called from. Okay, so that we have seen practically. Let's move on. And this example, it's pretty simple as well. So run through this code. So you have a function called create person, a console log, just this, and the function returns an object. The object contains two properties, my name property and display name property. My name has a primitive as its value, and display name has a function as its value. Pretty simple. And you invoke create person function all on its own. So absolutely no object context here. That's what written, non-object context. Second is, so when you invoke this function, typically an object is returned that gets pushed into other I. Okay, the variable other I. Now the variable other I is pointing to the object. Okay, this object which got returned. And the third console log, you are invoking the function display name, right, with the object context. With the object context. This is what we'll be looking at. Pretty simple, straightforward. If you run through this code. Okay, let me run through this code first and then explain the infographic. Cool, this is the one. Uncomment this. To uncomment inside the VS Code, control and slash. Comment it, again the same thing. Comment and uncomment. It's sort of a toggle. This is done. Let me run through this code. Refresh. Okay, I have a debugger set here. So it means that this is called, right? So you have the function called the create person. That's a function call. And it invoked this function. And you could see the execution context created here. It's a function's local execution context. And this invocation has happened out of this line, right? Line 140. So which means that it is invoked on its own. So we had seen what would be the value of the variable. This, you could see this is pointing to the global object. So there is absolutely no confusion here, right? And I move on, right? So it returns this object. Okay, it returns the object, and you could see, let's say it returns the object, and now you could see it is returning this object, so the display name and my variable. So this is an object which contains two properties, display name and my variable. That is what is got returned, okay, into the other I. Now other I points to the object, and that gets printed. And I move on to the next line. This is pretty interesting. Okay, so here you had seen this is pointing to the window. Now I'm invoking display name, which is the method, right, within this property, this object, right? So because I'm using other I, which represents this object, okay, and I'm invoking display name function or the method here. And you could see the watch window. Okay, so I'm moving on. You could see this changing to object. This is changing to object. Okay, So this is representing the same object, right? This inside this particular method is pointing to this object, this one. Okay. So when I say this, it is going to print the entire object. You could see this here. Okay. And when I move on to next line, so this dot my name is nothing but this points to this object. Okay. And my name is pointing to Kali. So automatically it should print Kali here. Let's move on. You could see Kali getting printed. Pretty straightforward, is it not? And let's look at the infographics. That's exactly what you see here. Okay, the first line, um, other I dot display name, it invokes this particular method, and here this points to, right, this points to the whole object, because you are invoking display name using the object. Okay. And that's what you see here. The next one is this dot my name, which this represents the whole object, and my name represents a property within this object, so it's going to print Kali. Okay, that's what you see in this infographics. Let's move on, and this is the final scenario. Okay. And example, this is O2C, and here we look at there are, few methods inherent to any function. Okay, inherent to any function. So you have apply and call and bind method. So we look at the call method because the concept around this is similar. So the call methods define no methods that are defined for all functions. The call method calls the function with a given this value and arguments provided individually. So call method can pass arguments to a function. Okay, the first argument is going to override the this within that function. Okay, the first argument is going to override this within the function. So let's look at the code. It's again pretty simple, straightforward code. And yeah, so okay, so let's look at this one. Yeah, uncomment this. Okay, cool. So straightforward function alert, and we had seen this earlier. And this is an object, and with two properties, age is 45 and alert as the function. So this function, right? So this becomes a method of me object, and you can see this alert dot call. So call is an inherent method of any function. Okay, so um, alert dot call and me object, I'm passing an object, okay, into the call method. So the first argument that you pass inside the call, okay, replaces this within this function. So whichever function reference that you have made to call, okay, so this is going to be replaced with the object, the first argument of the call. So you pass an object as the first argument, that object is going to override the this within this function. Okay, within the function. So what it typically means, you're you're invoking the alert, right? You're invoking alert using call, and you're passing me object. It means that the this within the function is going to be replaced with me object. So this is going to print me object, and me object dot age. Okay, so me object dot age is typically 45, right? It's 45 years old is what you see. Let's run through this. Let's run through this. Okay, cool. Let me refresh the code. Let me comment this out first. Comment this out. Okay, and run through this code. Cool. Okay, so here I've invoked this function. Okay, invoke this function and passed this. Okay, that's implicit. Okay, when you use the call, anything that you pass into this is implicit, and this is going to print the value of this. So let's see. So in my opinion, right, so this console log should exactly print this object, right? It should print this object because we know any object as passed as the first argument would override this within that function. So let me check that. So you could see this here, this represents the me object. So 45 and alert function. Okay, and then again, um, me object dot age. So me object dot age is 45 years old is what you get to see here. Pretty cool. Let's move on. Okay, and this is which is pretty common. So the functions acts as constructors. Okay, and you use the new keyword. This is pretty common, right? So any object oriented programming, if you have experience, you have known the use of new keyword. So new of your class, right? So gives you an object. In this case, your function acts as constructors. So you can see this is a function named set my name. It takes one argument, my name, and what it does is two things. One is to console log this, and second is to create my name, a dynamic property inside the object which pointed to by this. Okay, only these two things the function does. And here now you are spawning an object. You could say new of set my name. So it acts as a constructor here, and you're passing Shibu as an argument into the function set my name. Okay. So what it typically does is when calling a function as a constructor using the new operator, it sets this argument to a new object. So this argument is the this variable inside your function. So what typically happens is when you use new, the and inside the function you have a new object spawned. Okay, anything that you do on the new object, let's say you set properties on the new object by setting the property on this. Okay, so what typically happens is when you are using this particular construct, a new object is being spawned, okay, inside of this function, and you know uh, anything that you set and it gets linked to the keyword this, and anything that you do on this, right, so impacts the new object. So you're setting a property here, so property set on this in the constructor will end up on the resulting instance of the object. So anything that you do with this impacts the new object, and at last the this is getting returned. So when you return the this is pointing to the new object, and anything that gets assigned, let's say in this case my n, now my n is pointing to the new object. Okay, and inside this function, anything that you do with this impacts this object here. Okay, and what we're trying to do here within this, you're creating, dynamically creating a my name property and setting the property with whatever you passed here. So typically my n dot my name is going to print Shibu. That's what you see here. Okay, so my n dot my name is going to print Shibu, and this points to the new object that got spawned, pointed to by the keyword this or the variable this. Okay, so let's read a formal let's look through the formal definition. When a function is used as a constructor, it's this is bound to the new object being constructed. Okay, it's this is bound to the new object being constructed, and anything that you do with this is going to impact the new object. Okay, let's run through this code pretty quick. Okay, let's run through this pretty quick. Okay, I'll save this and run through this code. Okay, here we go. So I've spawned um, an object here. So by this, I'm spawning a new object. And what typically happens is this is going to point to the new object. This is going to point to the new object. And I am creating a dynamic property inside of the new object. By using this notation, this dot my name, I'm creating this the property named my name inside the new object. And once this is done, it is going to return this, and that's going to be pushed inside whatever object variable, right? My n. And I print my n dot my name. It's going to print whatever value you have assigned here. Okay, and my n is pointing to the object that got spawned inside this function. That's what you see here. Here we go. Cool. Okay, and this gives you a summary of the behavior of this. So we have seen the global object, right? So when you invoke a function all on its own, this inside the function refers to the global object. Okay, typically by default this points to the global object. And when you use methods like call, apply, bind, it can refer to this to any object, okay, that you pass. You can pass an object as the first argument. And from inside, when you're referring to the function through an object using the dot notation, this inside the function points to the object, okay, that you use to invoke. All these are pretty elusive in nature, and we have seen how this behaves inside different context, and have gotten a sound footing on what the functions are inside JavaScript. Okay, so that's it for this episode, and thanks for watching. We will catch up with one another episode next week. Thank you, take care, bye bye.